Hi, my name is Lily. I'm reading Soldier Poet King, my own book. You can find it on Wattpad. And this is chapter 1. Chapter 1 is called The Boy and His Buddy William. Let's get into it. There once lived a boy born in a broken world. Son to the royal throne, you'd assume that he'd be overwhelmingly thankful for the life that God has brought upon him. But there is where you are wrong. Evan, the prince to one of the highest-ranking families in his area, sits here on his bed, his head in his hands and his knees pulled tightly to his chest. The light seeping in through the tinted glass of his balcony windows would turn the atmosphere of the room a warm yellow as it reflected off the mirrors and shiny items in the room. The air felt welcoming, the scent of the saltwater tides just below his view mixed with the cold, refreshing breeze. The boy would look up from the ground, aimlessly staring at his reflection from across the room. He would inhale, holding back any negative thoughts that he was capable of. He would close his eyes, holding his breath for a second before slowly exhaling. He took another good look at himself in the mirror before him. Today is going to be a good day, Evan. It better be, the boy would mumble, slowly standing to his feet. He would walk over to the mirror and pick up a comb conveniently placed on the table beside him. Taking the comb, the boy would fix up his dark, sunflower-burnt hair, parting it ever so slightly to the side. He would run his fingers through the short, soft, and structured strands. Slowly, the boy would get ready to make his appearance into the outside world. He would wear a formal midnight ocean-themed button-down with black pants, patting himself down just to make sure he looked presentable. As a heir to the throne, there are many duties and responsibilities that are expected of you, including finding a maiden to call your own. Today, Evan was expected to fulfill this task, as unrealistic as it may seem. He has to find the woman that he's going to marry, and today is the day that he has to decide. As Evan finishes getting ready for the day, a light knock can be heard at the door. "You can come in," Evan would state, making his way over to the balcony side of the room. Through the door enters a petite older lady. She spoke in a comforting tone. "Good morning, my prince. I don't mean to interrupt, but I would like to remind you of the day," the woman would infer, placing a hand over her chest and bowing before him, with her head down and her eyes closed. Evan would smile at her. "I told you, Charlotte, you can call me Evan. No need for all that formal stuff." The lady, now known as Charlotte, would nod. "Yes, of course." A moment of silence would occur between the two as they stood there. "Well, what's on the agenda today, then? Anything of interest?" Evan would break the silence. "My parents gone today?" he asked. The little lady would just nod her head. "All right, well, did you need any help with preparations for today? Surely I can do something." Charlotte would furrow her eyebrows. "Oh, don't be silly, dear. You've done quite a lot already," she would imply. All right. But if you need anything, let me know." Evan would give Charlotte a warm smile, Charlotte returning it to him. Charlotte would look around at the room before heading back over to the door and lightly closing it behind her as she exited. After that, Evan would turn his attention towards the balcony, stepping out the door and resting himself on the barricades. The view from the balcony was astonishing. The bright sun glazed over the shore and sand with no clouds in sight, and the village was uprising with music and laughter that you couldn't quite understand from all the way up in the castle window. Evan always found himself gazing at the ocean and the beachside the most. It was so calming to just close his eyes and listen to the birds and the waves, the wind blowing just enough to cool him down from the warmth of the sun. Everything was so peaceful. For a little while, time had stopped moving. Until something over by the docks caught his eye. It was hard to make out exactly who or what it was, but something drew Evan's eyes to a person arriving to shore from the docks. "I guess it's time for me to face today." "All right, let's go." He would pick himself up, and eventually leave his room with his fancy crown on his head and a satchel crossed over his chest. Throughout the hall, Evan would slowly angle his head lower at the sight of the murals and photographs on the walls. Each were intriguing and unique in their own ways, whether it be a group photo of certain ancestors, a portrait of the king, or even just a message dear to the hearts of the family. At the end of the hallway, there lay a huge picture frame. In it, there was a painting of the following: the king, his son, around the age of 5 or so, and a dark print of a woman that sat next to them. The woman in the mural was smiling, her bright eyes shining with the same priceless diamond blue that Evan so graciously represented. She looked so lively, so free. This was Evan's mother. Now looking up from the painting at the end of the hallway, Evan would ever so slightly grin. Today is going to be a good day, he would whisper mercifully. And with that, the young man would turn his body to face the stairwell and let himself be engulfed into the outside world. I'm telling you, you stupid... You can't punish me for trying to feed my family. A man in ripped clothes, covered in dirt with no shoes, stood restrained in the middle of the kingdom entrance. I'm sorry, sir, but these are king's orders. Better just take it and not cause any mayhem, a guard would reply to the commoner. His armor was a shiny silver with blue lacing. Evan would peek out from behind the corner of a nearby stairwell as a few other guards, dressed in silver chainmail and covering their faces, took the man away. The guard dressed in traces of blue would lift his helmet up, setting his face in his hands. This guard's voice seemed familiar to the prince. William? Is that you? Evan would walk down the stairs, becoming more visible. The guard would perk up, startled for a split second before his eyes lit up. Evan! My boy! He would pivot towards him, excited to see the prince. The two boys looked at each other with stars in their eyes. Running over to each other, they would do a little handshake, and at the end, they would high five, letting out a reassuring laugh. Dude, where have you been? I've missed you, Evan beamed. I've been off with Olivia, traveling around the world. We're back at the bakery, though. Couldn't miss today for the world. Speaking of which, how are you? I know today must be a lot, huh? William would ramble, setting his sword out to the back of his side. The prince's facial expression would change. Yeah, I don't quite know how to feel. It's like my whole life is flashing before my eyes. It's sort of scary, he would confess, rubbing the back of his head. Oh, don't worry about that. It's totally not like marriage will change you as a person. I mean, look at me. I got married, and I'm still the same old William as before. Just I've sold my soul to a singular woman for the rest of my life, and she owns me and all of my personal belongings the second I put that ring on her finger. But, that's normal. William would smile at the prince, sticking a thumbs up. The prince would look at him up and down in disbelief. Huh? Don't worry, though. You'll be fine. Hopefully. The prince would turn away from William, somewhat jokingly crying in agony, with his head in his hands. It's okay, Evan. Trust me. I get it. Wives make no sense, William would say, patting his friend on the back. Evan would let out a slight giggle. Will always knew how to cheer him up. Well, anyways, Evan would begin, setting his act off to the side. I was thinking about heading into town. I got a couple of hours of daylight to burn. Want to come with? Will would think for a second. Yeah, sure. I'll join you. It was quite a big deal for the prince to go out into the town, especially unsupervised. Ever since he was 10 years old, his father always forbid him from just leaving the castle perimeters and wandering about. But Evan was just about 17 years old. He should be able to handle himself. Nevertheless, Evan did enjoy the outdoors. He enjoyed breathing in the scent of freshly baked bread and watching the villagers dance around the gardens without a care in the world. Sometimes he too wished for an easier life. A life with more freedoms and less responsibilities. A life where anyone can be anything, where he can be anyone. But unfortunately, he had no full idea of how the world really worked from outside of his walls. He only saw the good sides. Outside the castle, the village was full of life. Sparkling lights, laughter, and chatter filled the atmosphere with joy. The village was all Evan could have ever dreamt of. Now, he and his buddy William sat beside the gates, the entrance of the town. They watched as kids ran around playing games, birds explored the bright evergreen grass, and smoke whistled its way out through the chimneys. I don't really see why I need to be wed. It's a silly thing, especially at my age, Evan sparked, enjoying some bread that the two had acquired from down the street. 'Cause it's all, okay, Evan, now you gotta pick one woman for the rest of your life. But what if I don't have any experience with that kind of stuff? What if I choose the wrong one? What if I end up unhappy? There's just so many questions with no answers, Evan rambled, looking over at his friend, who was making love to his share of baked goods. Well, William began with a mouthful. He gulped, wiping his face of breadcrumbs and whatnot. Something every prince your age has to go through, right? I mean, it's not like you've really put yourself out there now, have you? He called out. He'd make eye contact with Evan before the prince would sigh, gifting him another piece of bread as a man would feed the ducks on the riverside. Well, maybe I don't want to be a prince, the boy would confess, twirling his fingers in the air. Maybe... William basically choked hearing those words. What? He said, his eyes going wide. He covered his mouth, trying to be not to me abnormally loud. Why wouldn't you want to be a prince? I mean, dude, I love you, but you have so much going for you. One day, you'll be building things, but like with the snap of your fingers. You'll have so much respect and power. No one will be able to tell you what to do. William sprung up from the ground, basically frolicking in his own imagination and fantasies. Meanwhile, Evan looked down at the ground, admiring the beauty of the flowers on the grass. His eyes grew dull and dark, and his smile seemed to fade. It was always so easy to hide behind that crown that he didn't even try anymore. Yeah, you're right. He felt like he's had this conversation a million times before. Yes, sir, just nod and agree. It was always the same thing. Soon, William, seemed to disappear, replaced by a figure of his father. The sad, cold shell of a man he was. Evan didn't despise of his father, but he definitely did not want to be anyone like him. Evan? You okay? William said worryingly, almost shaking him in a panic. Yeah, I'm fine, he'd reply. Evan would snap himself back to reality. Hey, we should go check out the bakery. Haven't seen Liv in a while. He would stand up, brushing himself off. William's eyes lit themselves up like lights on a Christmas tree. Yes! He would exclaim, spitting out part of his bread that he had in his mouth. He would stand up, his armor clashing and clanking, and he would throw his arms up in the air. Good idea! Let's go! William would grab Evan's hand and basically start to strut his way over to Pastries and Pieces, the bakery that Will and his wife, Olivia, ran. Growing up, Olivia nor Will grew up in a good home. They would spend most of their time playing make-believe in the middle of town hall or reading a book by the fountain. Money was hard for their families, so all they could ever ask for was the bakery. A place to themselves, a place that they can call home. And they make good money there too, not to mention. Will met Evan when he was around 14 years old. The prince himself had only been around 9 then. This was around the time that his mother became really sick. Evan would spend his days mostly playing with wooden swords in the greenhouse garden, or cooped up in his room, or in the back alleyways of the village. He met Will, an orphan, in the streets. They would duel in playing swords, and when Mother got better, Evan was even able to introduce Will to her. The queen had offered him a room within the castle walls and a job as a soldier in training. Now, almost 7 years later, William was the kingdom's most trusted guard and newlywed to the love of his life.